Who, Hawkeye? But he's just some guy with a bow and arrow, right? What kind of villains could he possibly fight? Well, quite a few as it turns out. Yeah, believe it or not, when Clint Barton and Kate Bishop aren't helping out their respective Avengers teams dealing with world-ending threats, they do actually have superhero careers of their own, where they fight crime on more of a street level. Not that we're in any way disrespecting Clint's contributions to dealing with the Avengers levels villains like the Chitauri invasion, Ultron, or his involvement in the Infinity War in the movies, mind you. But with his own Disney Plus series on the way, and with at least 2 of his comic book villains confirmed to appear, there is no better time to take a look at some of the iconic Archer's deadliest foes. One of Hawkeye's most well-known enemies, and one who is confirmed to be appearing in the Disney Plus series, is his mentor Jacques Duquesne, better known as the Swordsman. Jacques was one of 3 mentors to Clint Barton after he and his brother Barney joined the Carson Carnival of Traveling Wonders following the death of their abusive father, and he taught Clint everything he knew about handling bladed weapons. Unfortunately, Jacques had a gambling problem and stole money from the carnival to pay off his debts, leading to a confrontation between him and Clint, and Jacques assumed he had left his protege for dead. However, years later, he resurfaced as a mercenary known as the Swordsman, using his skills with a blade to commit crime. The Swordsman's career as a supervillain was kind of short though. At one point, Jacques joined the Avengers as a double agent for the Mandarin, but he actually came to genuinely like being a hero. So much so that after bouncing back and forth with his loyalties for a while, he eventually gave his own life to save his new love Mantis from Kang the Conqueror. During his time as a double agent for the Mandarin, Jacques was outfitted with a specialized sword enhanced with Maculan technology, making it able to produce flame, electricity and gas to make him more effective and give him the potential to be quite deadly. However, there had been others who took up the mantle of the Swordsman. One of them was Baron von Strucker's son Andreas, who had a stint as a member of the Thunderbolts, as well as an unknown person who once fought Steve Rogers. Jacques' daughter Adeline, however, became the superheroine called Swordswoman and joined the Euroforce, so maybe the one thing that runs in the family is, ultimately, heroism. When people say that the Black Widow movie's Taskmaster was a letdown, it's mostly because she took the name from and had very little in common with a very popular villain from the comics. Anthony Masters, known better as Taskmaster, one of the deadliest assassins in the Marvel Universe, was born with so-called photographic reflexes. That is to say, he can perfectly duplicate any move he's seen another person perform just once. Using his ability to become a SHIELD agent, Anthony then got hold of a German recreation of the Super Soldier Serum and injected himself with it, which gave him superhuman strength to match his skills. Putting on a skull mask, calling himself the Taskmaster, and forming the Taskmaster Academy, where he would train anyone who could pay, he then became an assassin, and he ended up butting heads with the Avengers and many, many other heroes over time. So far, Taskmaster has, among other things, copied Captain America's fighting skills and shield techniques, the Black Knight's skills with the sword, and Clint Barton's otherwise unparalleled skills with a bow and arrow. Taskmaster's popularity has seen him become a bit of an all-purpose Marvel character, serving sometimes as an anti-hero and sometimes as a full-on villain. But ever since a memorable encounter where Hawkeye and Ant-Man took down one of the recruitment rackets hosted within Clint's old carnival, the two have gone up against each other on a few other occasions, and he's always put up a heck of a fight. Speaking of Matt Fraction, that's a name you just can't avoid when you read about Hawkeye, considering he was the writer of the widely beloved Marvel Now run from which the upcoming show seems to draw a lot of inspiration. Along with all the other things the comic did for the identity of Hawkeye as a whole and for Clint Barton and Kate Bishop as characters, it also introduced a new deadly adversary. That being Kazimierz Kasprzak, known in mafia circles as the Clown. Now, I know, clown supervillains are a dime a dozen, but we're not talking about yet another maniacally giggling Joker clone. Kazi, as he is often called, continues the circus theme of Hawkeye and his enemies as the son of a pair of Polish circus performers who sadly died when their circus was bombed during a show in Sokovia. After fleeing to the United States with his best friend Yannick, the latter sadly also died in a terrible subway accident, and poor Kazi's mind snapped. As a response to the cruel world he believed he lived in, Kazi became the Clown, wanting to spread as much pain as possible as a contract killer. And eventually he was hired by the Tracksuit Mafia to take down Hawkeye. Dressed in white to invoke more of a sad clown look than most other clown villains, Kazi is capable of both being very charming when out of costume and scarily ruthless and effective when on the clock. He takes absolutely no chances with his enemies and has a very pragmatic approach to assassination, all while absolutely loving his job. And sure enough, not only will the Tracksuit Mafia appear in the Disney Plus series, but so will Kazi. Here's hoping he gets to keep the makeup. No superhero sticks around for decades without eventually facing some kind of dark counterpart style villain, and Hawkeye is no exception. And that's where Trickshot enters the picture. Much like the Swordsman, Trickshot, a man named Buck Chisholm, was a circus archer and one of Clint's mentors. In fact, Buck, who was especially famous for his special bow that allowed him to curve his shots, was actually the one who taught Clint archery. Unfortunately, Buck turned out to be training Clint to take part in his extortion racket. Clint refused, of course, and Buck promised he would kill him for it, returning years later as a mercenary called Trickshot. Sounds familiar. They did fight a few times, but unusually for a comic book supervillain, Buck eventually died, not in an epic battle with his hated enemy, but of cancer, and he renounced his revenge against Clint at the very end. But then there's the second Trickshot, Clint's older brother Charles Barney Barton, who had enlisted in the United States Army after leaving the Carson Carnival and worked for both the FBI and S.H.I.E.L.D. During a joint operation with the Avengers, Barney sacrificed himself to save his brother from Hank Pym's old archenemy Egghead. Or at least Clint thought he was dead. In reality, he was kept in suspended animation and eventually revived by Baron Zemo, who then had the original Trickshot train him in archery. Fueled by Zemo's manipulations and his own lingering jealousy of Clint's status as a prodigy back in their circus days, Barney took the name for himself and faced his brother in a duel to the death. Though these days, they seem to be on better terms following the critically acclaimed Matt Fraction run of Hawkeye comics, where Barney helped Clint face off against the Tracksuit Mafia. Oh, and by the way, the third mentor I mentioned was a stunt biker named Dylan Sarro, who became the Bullet Biker, but yeah, that dude has almost no appearances, so he's not on the list. Speaking of Clint's days as a circus brat, one group of villains who have faced Hawkeye from time to time is none other than the Circus of Crime. While the circus itself has gone through many members and variations over the years, the one constant is their leader Maynard Tybalt, known better as the Ringmaster. With his gaudy outfit, Ringmaster strikes quite a figure, but it's his ability to hypnotize people that makes him tricky to keep locked up. He used to do this with the help of his specialized top hat, but after getting cybernetic eyes, he doesn't even really need the hat anymore, seeming to wear it mostly due to tradition. And honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way. He looks awesomely ridiculous, and I love it. The circus ranks kinda low since they're mostly focused on robbing the audience blind and little else. But still, they aren't afraid to attack lethally if they must, and they can't be taken too lightly as a threat. With their various skills like fire breathing, impressive strength, snake taming, acrobatics and weapons expertise, they have fought many heroes like Hulk and Spider-Man, and indeed the Avengers. But thematically speaking, they work especially well as adversaries for Hawkeye specifically, considering his own backstory as an orphan who ran away and joined the circus. You know, come to think of it, that circus was filled to the brim with criminals too, and most of them are on this list. History repeats, I guess. Hey, nobody said we would only cover Clint's enemies. Kate Bishop didn't really get to develop her own rogues gallery since she was a member of the Young Avengers, but during the aforementioned Matt Fraction run, she did make at least one very powerful enemy of her own. And that would be Whitney Frost, born Gillette Nefaria, although in supervillain circles, she's known far better as Madame Masque. As daughter of the Avengers villain Count Nefaria, the woman formerly known as Big M donned a golden mask and rechristened herself Madame Masque following a disfiguring confrontation with Iron Man, to whom she then became a recurring enemy, as well as an obsessive and destructive lover when she met him in his civilian identity as Tony Stark. She may not have superpowers, but thanks to being a crime lord in her own right and having plenty of resources, she has pulled the strings on many a big attack on Tony. However, when Clint and Kate infiltrated an auction where many of Marvel's crime bosses were bidding on a video recording showing Clint assassinating a dictator, it was fake by the way, the latter knocked Masque out and stole her outfit in order to pose as her so she could bid on the tape. Needless to say, Madame Masque did not take this indignity well. She swore to make her pay, and ultimately she became Kate's nemesis during her time as a private investigator in Los Angeles. So knowing that Kate is a main character in the upcoming series, it would almost be a waste to not set up Madame Masque for a future film or second season. One can always hope. Bows and trick arrows are all well and good, but when you're a supervillain, you're more likely to enjoy some heavier firearms. And that's exactly what William Cross, the cyborg known as Crossfire, does. After having served as a CIA agent, William Cross eventually faked his own death, only to resurface under a new identity and start his own criminal empire. He quickly got himself some rivals though, and he was soon the victim of a bombing that cost him 85% of his hearing as well as his left eye. These were soon replaced with cybernetic enhancements, which gave him absolutely deadly accuracy and made him a scarily effective hitman. Initially, he attempted to take down the Avengers using a supersonic brainwashing device, singling out Hawkeye and his girlfriend Mockingbird to test it on due to believing that Clint was the weakest of the Avengers. He used his device to make the two fight each other, and while he was eventually defeated, the encounter caused Clint serious hearing damage and made the two of them deadly enemies. With how personal he tends to get, Crossfire is probably the one villain who has the biggest claim to the title of Hawkeye's archenemy. Many things make Crossfire a shoo-in for appearing in the MCU as well. Not only is he the cousin of Darren Cross, who we've already seen menace Scott Lang as the villain Yellow Jacket, but he also started out as a former partner and villain of Moon Knight, who is getting his own series as well later down the line. Marvel is absolutely crawling with crime bosses, and while you're no doubt familiar with old school names like Kingpin, Silvermane, or perhaps even the Owl, the Hood is one of the newer branches on Marvel's tree of organized crime. At first, the Hood was just a 2-bit street thug named Parker Robbins. But one day he was lucky enough to find a hood and a pair of boots enchanted by none other than the old Doctor Strange foe, the Dread Dormammu, which gave him a slew of magical abilities. Using his powers for small-time crime at first, Parker eventually became more ambitious and climbed the ranks of the Marvel Underground, eventually building up quite the gang and earning the nickname The Hood from the media. The Hood then became a recurring enemy of the new Avengers team, of which Hawkeye was a member at the time, in his Ronin disguise that is. These encounters led to Clint considering the Hood a bit of a personal enemy, and in the Hawkeye Freefall series, he did things like attack the Hood directly using his Ronin persona, as well as outright stealing Hood's money and resources right from under his nose. Adding to his relationship with Hawkeye, one of the Hood's primary enforcers is Johnny Horton, known better as the supervillain the Griffin, who has had a few run-ins with Hawkeye as well back when he was leading the West Coast Avengers. So not only do we have a demonically powered crime boss to deal with, but he also has a mutated flying attack dog on his side. Whew, boy. Now, there's no doubt that Bullseye is mostly considered one of Daredevil's most famous enemies. It's to the point where he was a major antagonist in not just the 2003 movie, but also in the 3rd season of the Netflix series, even if he never got his iconic codename and spent most of the season posing as an evil daredevil. But then Bullseye has a bit of a history of impersonating heroes anyway. To back up a bit, Bullseye is one of the most mysterious and deadly assassins in the entire Marvel universe, defined by his near superhuman accuracy with all throwing weapons. And even things that aren't weapons. He has taken out a frightening amount of people with things like cutlery, golf balls, paper clips, and his own freaking teeth! He's a horrifying sadistic killer who would probably just do it for fun if he wasn't getting paid handsomely for his services, and he has antagonized Daredevil more times than you can count, even ending both Elektra and Karen Page's lives. But this video is about Hawkeye, and these two became enemies when Norman Osborn became the leader of a Dark Avengers team consisting of supervillains posing as the iconic heroes. His choice for the role of Hawkeye was Bullseye, something that definitely didn't sit well with Clint. Especially not once Bullseye was caught on camera attacking a woman he had supposedly saved while wearing Clint's costume. With both of them being impeccable marksmen, they make perfect enemies, and recently they had a showdown in the Hawkeye Freefall series, where Bullseye was dressed in Clint's old Ronin uniform and Clint was dressed up as Bullseye. Oh boy, can you guys please stick to your own costumes? This is getting really confusing. Baron Helmut frickin' Zemo. Is there a pie in the Marvel universe this guy doesn't have his maniacal fingers in? You all remember him from MCU stories like Captain America Civil War and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but Baron Zemo has a lot of history in the comics. As the son of the old-school Captain America villain Heinrich Zemo, Helmut became insistent on continuing his father's legacy once Captain America returned after being frozen. Since then, he has spent his long supervillain career forming one supervillain team after another, trying to spread as much chaos and destruction as possible. One of his most well-known feats was establishing the original Thunderbolts team. Basically, during a time where a majority of Marvel's biggest heroes were considered dead, he had a whole bunch of criminals pose as superheroes in order to gain America's trust. Unfortunately for him, many members of the team liked being heroes, and as a result they rebelled, and there have been many different variations of the team popping up over time ever since, including one led by Hawkeye. As already mentioned, he was the one who caused Clint's brother to become the second Trickshot, using empty promises to cure Buck's cancer to get him to train Barney, and then brainwashing the latter to fight his own brother to the death. If that's not a despicable personal attack, then nothing is. Their grudge even led to him to leave only Hawkeye alive after killing the rest of the Avengers in the Old Man Logan universe, all out of spite for the whole Thunderbolts thing, which eventually just earned him a whole lot of arrows to the chest, and his head, and the rest of his body. Despite Zemo already existing within the MCU though, he's unlikely to go after Hawkeye specifically, since this version of the character is more concerned with terrorizing anyone associated with the super soldier serum. So unless Clint joins Steve's other old playmates in hunting him down, don't expect to see this matchup in live action. Still though, counting one of Captain America's greatest enemies amongst your rogues isn't too bad for some guy with a bow. While we know for a fact that Swordsman, Cassie, and even Daredevil character Echo are going to appear in the show, I still have my fingers crossed that we'll see at least one more of these guys at some point. Come on Marvel, let's finally give Hawkeye some awesome solo fights.